Hey Reluctant Preppers, you could have been watching this video the moment it came out.
By going to HealingYourself.Life and subscribing to our new sister channel, Healing Yourself. See you there!
Does your family ever get exasperated with you for stockpiling such things as paper towels, bottled water, or toilet tissue? Well, they certainly can't object to you stockpiling money. Silver, the only money recognized by the U.S. Constitution. And your first 10-ounce bar of pure silver can be had at spot price with no premium by going to sdbullion.com/rp. And when you buy it that way, you'll be supporting Reluctant Preppers as well by going to sdbullion.com/rp. Thanks.
This is a quick update to thank you for building our number of patrons to 70 and growing on patreon.com/reluctantpreppers.
Soon, when we reach 100 active patrons, we're going to start sending out a 1-ounce U.S. Silver Eagle each and every month to one active subscriber, so you don't want to miss out on that.
Please help us grow by subscribing today at patreon.com/reluctantpreppers.
Welcome back to HealingYourself.Life. I'm your host, Dunnigan Kaiser.
And Melody Kaiser.
We're here with our off-grid Dr. J. Nielsen MD and family practice doc practicing in Northwestern Ohio. Tonight we're going to talk about detoxification and why it's so important to our overall health and recovery from other ailments. Dr. Nielsen, thank you once again for joining us here on HealingYourself.Life.
Nice to be here.
We've personally experienced a few run-ins with different ailments that have led us to, in your case, it was liver overload that ended up because of some treatments to another ailment. And until that got addressed, it was difficult to continue even treating the primary ailment that you were trying to treat in the first place. So we've been told by several doctors that it's something that people need to pay more attention to, but that many of us are woefully unprepared from an information standpoint or a technique standpoint of how to even know where to start when dealing with detox, and we don't want to be chasing shadows. So could you lead us into a discussion of where the real things are that are important for us to be aware of and what we can actually do about it?
I find the term detox to be disingenuous. I prefer poisoning. You know, if it were accidental, incidental, unintentional, I might like the word detox. But it's not. Almost everything that we're being killed with is intentionally being misrepresented to us by the government and the food industry and the healthcare industry. And they know darn well that they're poisoning everybody. And I say call poisoning.
And big agriculture.
Yeah, right. Which is the food industry. It's back. It's just, that whole pathway of, Europe spending $25 a pound on beef, and sometimes I get it for $1.50. Somebody's wrong, and it's us. Our meat comes packed in a plastic tube, and they won't let plastic touch their food. And so one of the things I wanted to do was I wanted to do a little gloss over of a few ideas about why some people are toxic and some people aren't. The problem really isn't all about that something's toxic. We were just talking about the fact that you can't kill me with mercury. I had 32 fillings when I was 16 years old. My hair analysis looks good. I pee mercury. Okay? But this is about the APOE4 gene in Alzheimer's. That's actually the gene for the protein metallothionein that causes the excretion of mercury and other metals. And so the reason that APOE4 is a genomic indicator of Alzheimer's is that heavy metal toxicity is a cofactor along with menopause. And so if you can't get rid of metals, you're going to have a higher risk. Okay? And so first of all, we have this, how hard are you to poison? And I always tell my patients, if you're going to kill me with heavy metals, make it lead, and usually at 1,100 feet per second, make it a heavy bullet. Okay?
I was wondering where that was going.
That one would probably get me, okay? Otherwise, I think I pee heavy metals, okay? And so, you have to have this concept that you bring your own propensities. Then we have things that we're doing, you just talked about it, that interfere with detoxification, and we call it healthcare. The most dangerous thing you can do is take the drug hydrochlorothiazide, the water pill they mix with all blood pressure pills. Wow. It is the most common cause of hepatitis, and the liver's where you detoxify things. Okay, I saw 2 people with elevated liver enzymes from hydrochlorothiazide yesterday. Okay, that's how common this problem is. And so we've got the concurrent competitive pathways for detoxification issue going on. And then you've got the kidney and the liver thing. Okay, it's not as big as you'd think until you're in kidney failure or liver dies. You kind of sort that one out. That's not a real big deal. Then you need to look at, is it that you're getting a lot of something, or is it that you can't get rid of it?
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, there are antibiotics that you take them and they just stay in you forever, and they're, very hard to get out. And so, you've got, and then there are some things that it's only really poisonous because you took it with something else. We all know that one, Tylenol and alcohol.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Right. I hesitate to tell people how to correctly kill themselves with Tylenol, but if you take Tylenol chronically for days and then do your overdose, as an ER doc, that's a disaster to me. Whereas saying, I'm going to kill myself if I don't take Tylenol, I'm going to take a lot of it tonight, not that hard to get out of. And so this concept that you're loaded up and then you're overloaded is a big deal. Okay. And then you've got the concept that something's poisonous because you simply don't know how to metabolize it. It was intentionally made unremovable. NutraSweet. NutraSweet is simply the other isomer of a sugar that exists and is made by the human body, but is a dextroisomer, as are most things in the body. And this is a racemic mixture of left and right, dextro and levoisomers, and the mirror image of the molecule is extremely toxic, and we don't know how to break it down, so it accumulates. Okay, and so this inability. Trans fats are another example of that. We know how to metabolize fats till we heat them to 300 degrees. Put a kink in the molecule, and now our degradation pathway is destroyed. Okay. And so keeping all of those ideas in mind as you talk about antitoxin, you really start to ask yourself, why is this drug so poisonous? A great example would be Fosamax for osteoporosis, or those new once-a-year IVs. Well, they're really poisonous for lots of reasons, but the reason they're really poisonous is because they're meant to be real sticky and get in you and not come out for months.
Okay.
So by design, they're meant to have a long half-life.
Long half-life, yeah. And so, those are all issues. One of the things is that you want to learn to think in broad categories. If you become really, really afraid of endocrine disruptors, your health will immediately improve. The person who's got a Glade air freshener in every room and a can of Febreze in the bathroom, it might as well take my lead and blow their brains out. They're killing themselves.
Okay. For those who missed it, you can go back and check out our video that we did with you last month, and it was on endocrine disruptors, including
the dirty dozen.
All the things that affect
and there's the list of them.
Hormones.
If you just type in the dirty dozen of endocrine disruptors in Google, this article comes up. And I'm not even going to touch it. I'm just going to go, that's really a big deal. It goes back to the soy. And it's important because when we looked back, we have some very, very old history of being poisoned by people. This book was written back when we were putting somatomedins in milk, the growth hormone.
Okay.
And we fought this in the U.S. Senate, and the guy who wrote the book sat there and listened to the entire Senate investigation and said, they'll never put this stuff on the market, having heard what they told the U.S. Senate, and it went on the market. And he said, what's the deal? Why did this go out there? And it isn't being put in milk today, not because we decided it wasn't poisonous or we became ethical. The farmers all quit doing it because it made the cows so sick that the increased milk production wasn't worth it. They got too many infections.
Mastitis, yeah.
Right. And it was a big problem. You just weren't meant to push a cow that hard. It's kind of like driving your car at 140 miles an hour, And so, and we have some really, really old poisonings. The Whole Soy Story, one of my favorite books, Kayla Daniels. Okay, I still marvel that the vast number of people who walk in my office have no idea that soy and styrenes and plastic water bottles and all those things are poisonous. A lot of reasons that they're so hard on you is they're competing in the pathways for excretion with other toxins. And you're getting so many of them. I mean, these people are drinking 8 bottles of estrogen water a day, you know. And the minute you do that, that's it. That's what your body's going to spend the next 3 days getting rid of. And so, you know, some of it sure is about the fact that it's a pseudoestrogen that's getting on your testosterone receptor, but some of it is just you're kludging your system up. And so you get somebody who's drinking bottled water or taking Tylenol, throwing down some Motrin, having 2 beers after supper. And then they come in and they say, I'm worried about being toxic. I go, I bet you are, except for, you know, I don't think we're going to make any progress here. The basic concept of that you're trying to quit putting things in. We have a saying, turn off the tap and then drain the tub. Okay? And so people want to come in and detoxify, but they don't have any interest in turning the faucet off.
Okay.
Right.
Okay? And I just think there are some recent good things that are out there that are. This is a really good book, Slow Death by Rubber Duck, which kind of reminds me of the Twinkie Deconstructed, another great book. This guy wrote a book on the 10 top toxins in food. And his editor looked up and said, you know that 8 of the ingredients you're talking about are in a Twinkie? And so he renamed the book and it sold better. Okay, it was going to be really scientific. This is another one of those with Slow Death by Rubber Ducky is just pointing out that you're actually handing that toy to a child. And actually, you really ought to scrub it for a long time before you ever hand any toy out of a box. They're all covered with estrogen disruptors. Sometimes you physically can see the white powder. That white powder is very close to pure estrogen. And so, you know, giving that to a boy who's now going to put it in his mouth and chew on it, it's kind of, wow. Let's go back to Tonka trucks and, you know, metal, and you'd probably be better off.
Right.
I have a whole list of things that I want to just kind of put in there just so people say, well, you forgot this one. This is in the 12 endocrine disruptors, the perchlorates.
Right.
Okay.
Lettuce.
Really, we all remember the lettuce thing.
Yep.
Okay. So I got to find my notes because I laid them in upside down.
While you're looking for that, it reminds me 2 things you mentioned. One is the lunch I made yesterday, which was like all organic. I put it together from the bagel that I took out, the gluten-free bagel that I took out of a plastic bag, the organic turkey that I took out of a peel-open plastic tray, the organic cheese that I took out of a plastic tray, and then the mustard that I squeezed out of plastic packets. And I thought, everything I'm about to put in my mouth, all has been touching plastic its entire life.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Go to the grocery store and sort that out. And the answer is that's why you take your woven bag down to the farm market and go out to the co-op, is because you're buying fresh food and processed food's killing you. There's just no getting around that. It's awful. You know, this history of recognizing that we're being poisoned goes way back into the 60s. And I saw this today and I thought, what an interesting historical item, the Feingold diet. Getting rid of food colorings and preservatives for ADD. We didn't even look at this as toxicity. We looked at it as kind of an irritant. Okay. The other thing I wanted to show people is I want people to look really carefully at my iris. No, I'm kidding. There's my iris. Okay. And it's interesting because the thing you can see in iridology the best is toxicity. Joe Jemsek, who trained me in iridology, I took one of those 3-day weekend warrior courses that made me incapable of doing it, but made me know what it was like 25 years ago. Great course. And he trained under Jensen in Germany, who is considered the great German iridologist. And he said in a meeting that there's no such thing as a green eye. He says all green eyes are toxic. Green eyes with brown spots on them really need worked up.
Oh my gosh.
And I thought, that's a big statement. There are a lot of green. I see a lot of green eyes with brown spots on them.
Sure.
Yeah.
I see a lot of green eyes. And he says there really is no such thing as a green eye. A green eye is always a sick eye that's toxic.
Whoa.
Yeah, and my iridology course blew me away. This guy turned around 20 years after I had thyroid cancer. He took all the 40 people in the class. He had us all fill out a 3-page survey and not put our name on it, but put our social security number on it so we would be able to prove it was ours later. And he took all of our photographs and he worked all night on all of our eyes after we all registered. He sent us in, photographed us, and sent us off for the evening after registration. And the next morning he walked in and handed everybody's form to them without their name.
Whoa. Wow.
Based on your medical history,
based on
correlating medical history to the appearance,
right?
The
and
visual,
he
the
pulled
visual
me
appearance of
aside at that meeting and said, "You need to be worked up immediately for thyroid cancer."
Wow.
And I said, "You're 15 years too late."
Oh.
And he said, "Well, that would be true. I mean, your iris has been telling you since you were born that that's true."
Whoa.
And do you know that if you very carefully put 1 drop of blood on a glass slide so it's perfectly round and don't disrupt it, don't stir it, and then put it in a device that slows the dehydration so that it dries over 24 hours instead of fast, that blood makes a picture of your iris. And you can do iridology from a drop of blood.
No, I did not know.
Well, that's just like
Wow.
spooky.
Yeah.
That's just like spooky.
Amazing.
You know. And so, you know, and I've never proven that. I've never seen that done, but
Okay.
that's what you know, Joe
Said, okay.
Pasek said.
Interesting. Very interesting.
One of the things is that I'd like people to realize that if we're talking about these competitive pathways, what is the most common thing that we're doing in America today, every day, that is filling our excretory pathways full of obstruction of removing other toxins and is killing us all? Antiperspirant.
Okay.
Aluminum. Okay. I have a young lady in my practice who invented, where is it? There it is, right there. She invented this. It's made from an herb, and it's called pit juice. And you won't find it any place except in my office because she's just getting started. Jack carries it, and I carry it. But I've told people for years, you know, get on once a week. If you put in once a week, now it's important to remember that these are both deodorants. You can't be antiperspirant
or you're blocking that
unless you're aluminum. Okay? And so, you know, when you look at all the work that Jack and I've done for years on heavy metal toxicity, all hair analysis shows people pumping out massive amounts of aluminum. And I always tell people that the most toxic metals, mercury and cadmium, okay, are gentlemen. They always stand at the door and go, "No, you first. You first." And they just wait. And as long as you've got anything coming through the door, they never go through. And so until you get rid of that aluminum, you're not, and a lot of times I want to get a little impatient and go, "Come on, Jack, let's get to work and let's chelate this stuff." And he says, "Could you get him to get rid of the deodorant and stop the aluminum problem?" And sure enough, the next hair analysis shows they're dumping all these metals. Okay?
Yeah.
And so it's that competitive pathway concept again.
So does increasing sweating, if sweating a little under the pits helps a little, does sweating a lot help a lot, like saunas and that sort of thing?
Saunas work. They're a little overrated. Okay? I've not seen anybody get better from clinically significant mercury toxicity, but I've seen people improve more because they've done them, would be my category for saunas. You know, the big thing for serious metal toxicity, and we'll get into it last, is chelation. I can't go through any lecture without talking about the new toxin, stevia. Okay, just absolutely brutal stuff. And then we want to look at the things that we're doing, again, like the aluminum, that we go, "Well, I thought that was okay." This book has been out there for 25 years. We touch on this occasionally, the calcium bomb. It got book burnt. No one would publish it. It disappeared from libraries, etc. And about 4 or 5 years ago, it came back, and I got a copy back.
Wow.
And, you know, remember, every time you take 1,000 milligrams of calcium, you lose 400 milligrams of magnesium. That in and of itself is a really toxic thing to do to the human body, since magnesium is so beneficial and protective. And the second thing is why is anybody taking calcium? Because they think that it's going to prevent bone breakdown.
Right.
When in reality, it causes osteoporosis because it lowers parathyroid hormone, and parathyroid hormone is what causes bone to be deposited. So all that calcium ends up going into your shoulder spur and your coronaries and your kidney stones, and you just calcify yourself. We are overburdened with calcium because we already are getting it in dairy, and it isn't a natural food to us. We should be weaned. Okay. Yeah, right. And meanwhile, we're getting all the calcium we need from green vegetables.
Okay.
If we eat green
And so the minute somebody eats green vegetables, dairy, and adds pills, they're in real trouble. They're getting serious calcium toxicity. Okay. We talked about
green vegetables have calcium, or only certain green?
Darker the more.
Darker.
So kale and spinach and they're
turnip greens.
But as a general rule, people who are eating vegetables at a substantial rate in their diet are way above their calcium needs. And that calcium is slow released, so it doesn't suppress parathyroid hormone. Whereas dairy's about neutral. It hurts you as much as it helps you, and the pills are killing you. We talked about this. Any book on trans fats, I'm not particularly fond of Dr. Bob's. I just happen to own it and have a copy of it. And the concept that we're actually altering our food until it's poisonous, is out there. And so that, and then we live in Northwestern Ohio, so of course we have the blue-green algae, microcystin, which that really was a political thing. Our local mayor made himself famous and got in the news with Obama. But the plain fact is we've known about this crisis since 1959, when a bunch of people died in Minnesota who had an algae bloom and their water was coming out of a closed pond. And they all died in liver failure. And they got like 10,000 times what we've got. We now have federal regulations that say we're not allowed to go above 40 parts per whatever, million or billion. And if you watch in the summer sometimes, you'll see that the pressure in your tap will drop. And the reason is the Waterworks Department is processing the water harder. So they're slowing the throughput to get more removal of microcystins. And so what our mayor did was 40's the limit. So one day it bumped over to 41 and he went, oh, we have a crisis. No, we didn't have a crisis. You've been drinking 39 all summer. You think 41 did something? Okay. So everybody went over to drinking bottled water, which really killed them. Our tap water's really pretty good. It's got a little arsenic in it, but that's about it.
Okay.
This was just published the other day. People who like to wash a lot of things in bleach, pure bleach, where you take bleach and you really pour it on, have measurable deterioration of lung function and die earlier.
Is that
from chlorine poisoning, of course.
From the vapor?
Yeah, right, from the vapors. It's from the chlorine.
From scrubbing basement walls with bleach.
Oh, speaking of basement walls, let's talk about that toxin, black mold.
Yeah.
Okay, this is my girl's living room floor. That's the first time I figured out black mold in a patient. She sent me this picture. I'm telling you, I treated her for mercury. She had it. I treated her for Addison's. She had it. I worked her up for Lyme. She didn't have it. Jack and I got her about 2/3 better. And they were so tired of being chronically ill. And the kids were all ADD and irritable, and everybody's life is a mess. And they decided to take a 2-week vacation and go to the beach. And they got up the next morning and everybody was okay. And boy, they all thought, we needed a vacation. And that was the story until they got home and she opened up her front door and she truly fell through her front door.
Oh, wow.
And she walked back out of the house and called me up and went, why would that happen? And I said, you've got black mold. There's no other explanation for that. And we brought in, the abatement people, and they put yellow tape around the house on the outside and the front yard. That's how bad the house was. It is a $1 million home, and it is now sat on the market at less than half its price for 5 years.
Wow.
It is destroyed.
I guess they should just tear it down.
Yeah.
Nobody else should go live
So,
in that house.
my whole point to people is, if you've got leaking soffits, you see mold growing in your bathroom ceiling, you see wallboard that's in trouble, you pull up carpets and you see where the dog peed and mold's growing there, you smell musty things in your life when you go someplace. You really need to go up on Wonder Makers and pay the $200 and order one of those trap kits and test the rooms that you're at. And if you flunk that test, you need to call in the professionals and you need to get out of that house and you need to get going. There's not any real difference between the mycotoxins that are in our water and the black mold. Okay. It's just that we're getting so much more of the black mold. It isn't really an infection. You can get nocardiasis and et cetera, but it's really a neurotoxin. It's just like Lyme. The real problem in Lyme isn't so much you're infected as you have all those circulating neurotoxins. Black mold's the same way.
Okay.
I'm going to do water a little bit, and
just while you're looking at that, just to mention that it may not even be just your home workplace. I have a very sensitive nose for mold, and I've detected it at the workplace as well. And it seems like when I report it to others, they get these blank deer in the headlights stares, like they have no idea what I'm talking about. And I can smell it right away when I go into a conference room or something. If it's leaky ceiling, carpeting, I don't know what it is.
Right.
But I guess it's for people to speak up and advocate for themselves. If you got to stay in your workplace, you got to speak up if you can detect it.
It's dangerous. I mean, I have people right now who work for a major utility company here in northwestern Ohio. That the whole building is just one of the sickest buildings I've ever seen. And ironically, they used to be in the safety building, which they abandoned over black mold. And they moved these people into an almost as bad a building. Okay? And they retard the roof with the people working in it.
Oh, my.
It was already terrible. And then they just gave everybody a fan, like blowing the toxins around was going to help.
Right.
Okay,
Help you. Yeah.
And so you have employers that you're sitting there and you're 28 years into your 30 years to retire and 63 years old, and you got nothing. They don't care. Mm-hmm. They don't care. There's nothing you can do. We talked today about hydrochlorothiazide, and we could do a 2-hour lecture on the toxicity of drugs. I think that'd fall on deaf ears with this crowd. I think everybody knows that. That's the side effects of hydrochlorothiazide. The number one cause of drug-induced hepatitis in the United States causes 3/4 of all the gout I see in my practice, is the cause of almost all the low potassium, elevates your cholesterol, elevates your blood sugar, damages your kidneys. And we're doing it because we want to lower our blood pressure? I thought we were trying to reduce cardiac risk, not increase it. But the government decided 20 years ago that any company with a small fee can bring their blood pressure pill out with hydrochlorothiazide in it and call it a combo. And I went, could we have picked any other water pill than hydrochlorothiazide? Just a mess. But, we're not immune to that. Family Practice News last year that proton pump inhibitors, Nexium, omeprazole, etc., 300% increase in risk of atrial fibrillation. We could do that all night. Atrial fibrillation and biphosphonates, Fosamax, and all of those drugs.
Okay.
I've had people go straight from the IV lab where they got their 1-year-long drug and come straight to my office in atrial fib. And then we do things because we think they're cosmetically a good idea. I mean, what kind of dirty things do we rub on our skin and call them cosmetics? But, oh my gosh. There's only one thing on earth that's more dangerous, the most dangerous thing on earth is 1 molecule of mercury followed by 1 molecule of Botox.
Uh-huh.
And we do it for cosmesis? Mm-hmm. Wouldn't do it to anybody.
Okay.
I want to switch gears and get into some of the big ones. We did pretty good there covering some basics. This was, let's be accurate, this is a pretty good magazine. First magazine, women's magazine. Jan sits in bed at night and reads it. Let me get it up there in good shape.
Okay.
Okay, she tore this out the night before last and handed it to me. Nothing holds me back now. I am all better. And if you're paying any attention, you might have seen Monsanto.
Okay.
Roundup.
Yeah.
And we now have a huge lawsuit that's going in from a worker who applied and tested Roundup. And he's got some pretty good evidence that he's got cancer from it, and it's going to be the big test case. And of course, gee, I'm not going to hold my breath.
I did hear that the judge was going to allow the case to go forward.
It is. That did happen.
Yes, so that's, I guess, a positive thing.
Well,
but yeah.
I wanted to try and get us a little bit of an idea of what's going on. I have read a dozen different models of what glyphosates do and how they work, and I put a lot of work into it today, and I found this. And you can actually, if you put how glyphosate works and why it's deadly, what's at the top there, you'll come up to this chart, which is 3 pages long.
Now, is this in Google Scholar or just Google?
This is just Google.
How glyphosates work and why it's deadly.
Right. And the answer is that it goes down what's called the Shikimate pathway, which is a 7-step metabolic process that is in the pathway. It says animals don't have the pathway to make these amino acids, and that we have to get tyrosine, phenylalanine, and tryptophan from plants into humans or plants into animals and animals into human, and these are essential amino acids.
Right.
Okay, and so what this does is, and this is page 2 off of that, so you can go look that up. Okay, and what these do is plants have lacked the ability to make these amino acids completely. And so they just die because they don't have the essential amino acid. And it says here, and I thought this was well done, scientists thought glyphosate would be safe because humans don't have the shikimate pathway. But they didn't realize that our gut flora bacteria do.
Oh, wow.
Okay?
Wow.
And
important.
so that's how we acquire those amino acids, through our diet. Okay? Which then took us to page 3. Which is this one. I really like this little article. I thought it was a pretty good chart, so I'll give everybody a chance to screen grab it if they want to. And it says, when your gut is exposed to glyphosate, 2 things happen in your gut. Okay, you get a wild imbalance of certain types of bacteria, which is inflammatory bowel disease. Right, so that's the reason why we're seeing so much more IBD, which is why Humira and all of those immunosuppressives are being advertised every 10 minutes between every play in football.
Yes,
okay.
yes.
And the gut bacteria express or produce different chemicals and proteins than normal, which makes sense, okay? And the new proteins expressed by gut flora can be toxic to many functions in our bodies and lead to noxious changes in our body protein composition with an imbalance of bacterial influences. And I thought that was pretty well done, except for it missed what I read elsewhere, which is that once you change the genetics of these bacteria, every time they see a new load of food has this Roundup on it, it kicks it all on again. Okay? And I thought that was the event, but now I'm really beginning to understand that it's not so much that we're being poisoned by the Roundup, we're being poisoned by our own bacteria. And I knew I was getting more than one story, and I'm gonna just have to do more work on it. So then what I learned from this article that Jan handed me, I didn't know this, is that you can do a blood level for glyphosate. So I contacted my local lab today and said, get me a voucher price for a glyphosate level, because I got people all the time that just come in and are chronically fatigued, and I do my magic and my magic doesn't work. And you go, I'm missing it. And this definitely needs to be put at the top of phase 2, because this is another one of those, this probably doesn't bother me as much as it bothers you. I'm harder to kill. And so if you're glyphosate sensitive, okay, especially if you've got a bad gut,
Right.
then it's going to be big deal. And I've been doing this now for, 5 years. I've been telling people, look, if you don't know why you're sick, I need you to take 14 days and don't eat anything GMO. Don't eat anything that's got Roundup on it, okay? And don't eat anything that's got any gluten in it. And people come back in and they go, wow, I'm a lot better. What's wrong with me? And I go, I don't know. I told you to do 3 things. If you want to find out, go put them all back. Put a drop of Roundup on your tongue. See how that goes? No, that was wrong. That was wrong. We were kidding. Yeah, and
do not attempt this at home.
Yeah, do not try this at home. Yeah, and you go back and you put the gluten back. Have a croissant, and an hour later you feel terrible, and you go, well, okay, it was the gluten. And what happens is when you do that, they come back and they go, it's all of them, and I go, that's because they're all working in the same place. Everything I told you to do is all happening in the gut. Right? Sure. Okay. And so I found this little chart. I'm learning to look things up in Google Images instead of Google. And sometimes interesting stuff comes up. And I found this little chart when I put glyphosate and image. And it was a chart of the detection in the U.S. and in Europe. And it had a study by Kerwin in 2007 that was 2.7. And it had U.S. citizens, Moms Across America survey, and it was 18. And it had, these are American, and it had 48 male farmers, and they were up to 233. And then it had Europe, which doesn't allow Roundup in some countries, although now that's really changed in the last few years because the EU really needs to stay competitive, okay? And we've got European citizens up to 1.8, 441 citizens up to 5, and a farmer and his wife and 3 children up to 9. An American was 233.
Whoa! Wow!
And that was interesting, And of course, nobody should be more poisoned than an American.
Oh my gosh!
I mean, we're doing the most. And so I want to spend a little bit of time, talking about that. I think this is one of those things that we need to be socially and politically active. We need to be working really, really hard to get people to be putting pressure on things. Right. There's a new one that I'm talking about all the time. I got 3 pages on this one. Okay, this just came out. California has now started looking at some litigation about electromagnetic
RFI,
frequency.
Okay.
Yeah, and EMF.
Cell phones.
Okay. And they've actually got litigation going because cell phones are so dangerous. That thing where you put the 6 cell phones together and then call them all simultaneously and the popcorn pops. Okay.
What?
Yeah, I thought that was fraudulent. No, we did that one night.
You did?
Yeah.
And it worked?
It scared us all to death. We all screamed and ran from the room. It was just, and you go, oh my gosh.
You put 6
You have to get the right end of the phones together, and you have to dial and make them all ring at the same time.
Wow.
Because while the phone is ringing, it makes 3 times as much EMF as when you answer it. For about 10 seconds after you answer it, the EMF drops out of the phone.
Oh my gosh.
Okay? And so a phone you're ignoring is killing you more than the one you're answering, and you want to answer it and then hesitate to put it to your head. Now, if you've got any brains, you get a Bluetooth and keep it across.
Put it on speaker or whatever.
And put on speaker and get away from it. I have a long talk for patients about how to avoid EMF on a phone. Okay.
Okay.
Of course, cell phones are worse than flip phones, and etc. Okay. And so.
Smartphones are worse than flip phones.
Yeah, they're worse. Okay. And now, of course, we've got this whole thing. The other half of it's routers. And the third thing's living under a cell tower.
Uh-huh.
And actually, the reason people don't like being under windmills is that that's that low frequency ELF, like they buried in the ground for the submarines, which is why the dolphins swim up on shore and the whales get freaked out. That's all about that way of communicating with our nuclear submarines. But I've had 3 or 4 times over the last few years that I've had a family full of dysfunctional children who are chronically anxious, ADD, failing in school, nothing's quite working. And I ask mom and dad, I go, how many cell phones are in the house? if I turn on your cell phone, go to Wi-Fi, how many phones show up on that thing? I did that in my little
routers show up, yeah.
Okay. I went downtown in my little town and turned on my phone one time and got a scroll bar. Didn't know there was a scroll bar.
So many
29
Wi-Fi routers,
because our little town's old and all of the shops are 16 feet wide and they all have an apartment above them and they have a private router for the business and a public router for the public and one upstairs. So you're averaging one router every divide 3 and 6 every 5.5 feet on both sides of the street. And I got 29 routers. Mm-hmm. Oh, I'd move out of that apartment in a heartbeat. Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things I tell people is you really want to have your local phone carrier bring DSL into your house and get on T10-100 cable. Okay. And don't connect a computer you use every day by Wi-Fi. Okay. Connect it by DSL.
Hardwire, yeah.
Get it hardwired, okay? And then you really want to ask yourself, why do I have a router? You can go in and you can actually make a router work as a link by putting the cables in the back and turn off the transmission component of it with a switch, right?
If you're willing to deal with the wires, yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and deal with wires, okay? And use it only as a junction box, okay? And so I tell families, I go, what I want you to do is go home Friday night and collect all the kids' phones without telling them when they go to bed. Turn them all off. Turn off all the routers. Shut everything down. And I've had families come back in and go, God, they got up in the morning, the kids are playing a game together and sitting at the counter talking to us, and they look different, their personality's different. And I go, okay, we'll do that next Friday when they get up on Saturday morning, and then without telling anybody, go around and switch everything on, and they come back and tell me they were climbing over the sofa to kill each other within 10 minutes of turning all the stuff on.
Wow, okay.
And I think that's a genetic predisposition to hating EMF. I don't think EMF affects me that much. I think I'm just cool, calm, and collected, and don't have any anger or anything. I think I'm okay. I'm doing out there, okay? The Russians banned microwaves in 1976.
Wow.
Yeah, in all forms. Wow. Yeah, the cooking microwaves, they got rid of them. They said they're bad for your health, And what I did to solve that, because I'm a tea drinker, is I went out and bought what we used to call an Insta-Hot. There's one over there on my sink. They've got different names now, but it holds a quart of boiling water. Yeah. And replenishes it, and I really try really hard never to use a microwave, because how does a microwave really work? It heats up water molecules in the food, okay, until they vibrate and release free radicals.
Oh, lovely. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
Gee, somebody ought to warn us about that. I wonder why that didn't come up. Yeah. So,
wow.
And we talked to. And there are a million great books out there on gluten, okay? And I tell everybody who will listen, you really want to get off of all gluten. All gluten, reducing doesn't matter. 14 days, no gluten. Ask yourself how you feel, and then have a croissant. And ask yourself how you feel an hour later. And if you go, that was a terrible idea, and almost universally now it will be a terrible idea.
Right,
we're all gluten intolerant because Bergdorf or Bergfeld or whatever his name was, the guy that won the Nobel Prize for solving the wheat rust problem in Africa, may have really helped starvation in Africa. But that seed was so successful that it is now 98% of all wheat on Earth now.
Okay.
And so if you aren't buying flour from some high dollar organic grower who saved primitive wheat, you're getting it.
Okay.
So you're eating wheat, you're getting it. Okay. And so what happened is when the Egyptians, 7,000, the bread was really, I understand, invented to feed the Jews in the story Exodus. They needed to have that large population of 500,000 Jews and be able to distribute food to them so that they could be fed, and it wasn't very storable. Bread's pretty storable, okay, compared to pot roast or, salads, etc. And so at that point in time, I would imagine there were a fair number of Jews had a fair amount of diarrhea Okay, but we've now had all of that, those thousands of years to get used to that genomic gluten. And then 10 years ago, we changed the gluten. And, for the first 35 years I was in practice, I couldn't find a case of gluten enteropathy. Now I find a case every day because we've brought it back. And now, don't worry about it. In 7,000 more years, we'll be okay. But right now, we're cutting edge. Okay,
Right.
We're all getting reintroduced to this, and we're doing it with glyphosates,
Right. Yeah.
and etc. It's just absolutely a mess. So, that the one that I want to talk about that probably leads us into the end of what we're doing tonight is that we're having a lot of problems with heavy metals in our society. And we can just get into fighting words over that whole issue, and I will stay off of a lot of them. But like, here is one of those MSDS type of sheets.
For those who aren't familiar, that's a material safety data sheet. Any manufacturer that produces anything that has chemicals in it, when they sell it to any industrial or commercial customer, has to, by law, provide this safety data sheet that goes with it, so that people know. It's kind of like the package insert you get with your drugs, but it's with any material that you buy.
Right. Well, this is kind of like the same thing. You have to do the same thing with foods. You have to satisfy the USDA that you went through your food and analyzed it periodically. And this is MSG that was going to be used for hydrolyzed vegetable protein.
Monosodium glutamate.
Yeah, monosodium
Flavor
glutamate is a
enhancer.
Chinese restaurant syndrome, okay? And it has 10 parts per million lead and 2 parts per million arsenic. And that's what table sugar looks like too.
Wow.
And so, what that is some of that is that the plant just happened to pick that up out of our dirty water, okay?
Right.
And it's processing it and collecting it, okay? But some of it is that it's coming off of the sugar presses in the fields when they're crushing. And, there's lots of places for this stuff. Some of it may be coming out of the fumes from the diesel that's running the press, because nobody's thinking about toxicity at that level.
No.
Some guy who's down in the Dominican chopping cane and throwing it into that press may be 100 years old. Okay, and they don't care whether those fumes are upwind or downwind. They don't care whether those bearings are being ground up, etc.
Hit by the gallon or by the barrel or whatever.
Right, right. And so, we're getting a lot of sources of heavy metals that come from a lot of places like that. That is the vaccination schedule in 2002, long time ago. There are more vaccines now,
Yes,
and
right.
every blue dot is a dose of mercury. But that's okay, because we've been reassured that mercury isn't in vaccines, and that mercury in vaccines doesn't do anything, and that we removed it all. I have a letter from Sanofi that came out and actually said, right in the letter to the doctor, it said our new mercury-free flu vaccine has half as much mercury in it as the old stuff.
Dear.
I said, did anybody read this?
Yeah. Right.
It's like Pepsi-free, with no caffeine. Well, they just cut it in half. The government lets you say, oh, yeah, we don't have any of this in here because we cut it in half. And that's what they did to vaccines. And admittedly, there's less mercury in vaccines than there was. And my issue with vaccines isn't all about mercury, so
Right.
I don't care. And, of course, one of the people who really brought this to the forefront, wonderful book, is Dr. Hal Huggins. It's All in Your Head, a great title about the fillings in your head and the fact that they're killing you. And people don't realize the history of this. We had two organizations in the 1800s in the United States. We had the American Dental Society, which was all German dentists, and we had the American Dental Association that was all butchers and hackers and charlatans selling snake oil, etc., that were pulling teeth. And the scientific Germans were fighting in the late 1800s, 1880s, 1890s, going, no amalgams, they're poisonous.
Right. They were
Okay,
doing
we have to
gold,
find
right?
alternatives.
I thought they were
Okay,
doing gold.
and that they wanted to use gold,
Yeah.
right, which is correct.
Yeah.
Okay, And of course, gold wasn't that expensive back then. At dollar per year kind of thing. It wasn't as bad as it is today. And so, do you know anybody who's a member of the American Dental Society that was against amalgams? They disappeared. We got left with the American Dental Association. And the reason that they call integrative medicine docs quacks today is the Germans in the American Dental Society called it quacksalber. Quicksilver. Mercury, quacksalber. And that's where our term quack comes from, is because they called those dentists quacks because they thought that quacksalber was a problem.
Yeah, yes.
And so now look up today and how much quacksalber is being used in Europe. None. If you want to become a citizen in Denmark, we know they have open borders. You only have one thing you have to do to be a citizen in Denmark, and that's have your fillings removed on arrival and replaced with good fillings, white fillings.
Wow.
In Europe has no fillings. Mexico doesn't have fillings. Brazil doesn't have fillings. Argentina, South America, only America puts in fillings. Now, that problem's really stopped because we've now had almost 25 years of dentists being trained in other biological dressings. And so only an idiot's putting in a filling today. And so you just don't see, my mouth with 32 fillings. Of course, I have 32 fillings because I was fluoride poisoned. Fluoride caused cavities. It didn't prevent them, it caused them, along with all the other things that it did. I've always loved this chart. I pulled it out and I've shown it to many people. The greatest mercury detoxifier in the country is a man by the name of Andy Cutler. Andy died this year from his mercury poisoning, and he worked with his family doctor. He was a PhD in both physics and chemistry, and he dedicated his life to figuring out how to safely remove mercury. I was the head of the investigational review board that put DMPS, the chelator that Medicare covers. I actually put it through the FDA. And Andy Cutler showed up at all my IRB meetings and humiliated me with my lack of knowledge about chelators. Okay? And after I watched a whole bunch of my partners kill people with DMPS, and then I killed a lady with DMPS, thank heavens I managed to resuscitate her, and she didn't die. Okay? I gave up on the drug I put through the FDA. Still being used by alternative docs all the time because it's reimbursed. Okay? And Andy Cutler called me up one morning at my home. This guy was my arch enemy. And he called me up one morning and he said, I heard you gave up on DMPS. And I said, yeah. And he said, you want me to teach you how to do it right? And then I learned about DMSA and alpha lipoic acid and slow detoxification and careful pathways. He got all of his worst patients to all volunteer to donate their bodies to science. And when they died, they harvested tissue from all throughout their body, and he came up with a map of where mercury is stored in the human body. Only person who ever did that. Okay? Every place you see a no sign, a circle, is where it's accumulated. So it is in both the cortex and the midbrain, and then in the hypothalamus it only hits adrenal, and then when it gets to the pituitary, it only doesn't hit the adrenal. So it perfectly hits the neurologic tree. The neuroendocrine system gets wiped out by mercury, and then it accumulates in the adrenal, the thyroid, the liver, the pancreas. When you get done, it's a perfect score. And I was lecturing many years ago. Hal Huggins came to town, and Hal asked me to do 1/3 of his lecture, and I talked on chelation, and he talked on the impact on cholesterol. Because the reason your cholesterol is elevated when you have fillings is because the cholesterol is trying to bind the mercury. And that's the reason why some people, when they take statins, become so sick, because they mobilize mercury.
Yeah.
And so some of them it's that rhabdomyolysis, but some people it's mobilizing mercury. And I've seen some acute neurologic crises from statins that are caused by that. And so I got to lecture with Dr. Huggins, and in the middle of the lecture, he put up a slide, and it was clearly an electrophoretic pattern of proteins, of something, okay? And it had the biggest spike I've ever seen in an electrophoretic pattern. And he said, does anybody know what this is? And the other 3 doctors over there and I all looked at it, and everybody shook their head. And I said, it's cerebrospinal fluid in a patient who died. And he said, excellent. He said, I'm really impressed. How did you do that? And I said, well, there's not that much protein on it, so it's going to be like blood. Okay. I said, so I'm figuring it's CSF, and we're in a mercury lecture, so I'm thinking that spikes mercury. And he went, this wasn't as tough as I thought.
He's used to deductive thinking.
Yeah, right, exactly. And he says, exactly. He says, this patient died from mercury poisoning, and this is the spinal tap in ICU. And he says, I managed to get some of the fluid, and that's the mercury in the cerebrospinal fluid. And that just gives me shudders. Okay? And so there are a lot of good books that you can read on mercury detox. This is one of them. Ziff's book on dental mercury detoxification. There's a lot of arguments about how you should test people. And I used to chelate people and collect their urine, and I concluded that was really, really dangerous. And now I do hair analysis with Jack. But I love this story. This is one of my old chelated urines by giving EDTA and DMPS, the thing I used to do to people that they occasionally died. And this patient's arsenic is 564 when normal's less than 40. And I did an MRI on him for an unrelated reason, and his pituitary came back 3 times normal size with no tumors. Whoa. And I found this, so I chelated him for arsenic, and we repeated the MRI, and it was normal. It's a really cool case.
Wow,
yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, you had chronic headaches that went away, okay? And you can find these heavy metals any place you want. California wanted to start regulating chocolate because all chocolate has cadmium and lead in it.
Okay.
It's probably from the processing, you know. And we don't realize that, you know, I have 150 solar panels in Haiti. And every time one breaks, I really have to get aggressive because these guys go, well, can I have it? And I'll see if it can work. And I go, no, I have a great big pit that's 8 feet deep and 8 by 8 feet. And I keep, you know, taking my solar panels and encasing them in cement. Okay. And I'm going to end up with this great big rock of cadmium. And people don't realize how much cadmium is in a solar panel. And if you take all those broken granules and let them sit on the ground and let the rain wash over them, that's all going to make its way down through our water supply and come up, okay? And this was the article, you know, where do our TV sets and our monitors go when we die, okay? And that fun thing to do where you throw a rock into your television set and watch it implode is probably the dumbest thing you could ever do, right? Okay. Really dangerous stuff, okay? This is probably after aluminum, our most common poisoning in America, because it's how we make herbicides and pesticides, right? Cadmium and arsenic. Okay. And so the thing that we have in the Maumee River, okay, is, you know, arsenic. And so when you run our water, and the geniuses put the intake in the mouth of the Maumee River instead of putting it 10 miles out into the lake where the water's better. They put it right where all that water's coming down from all those farm fields, okay? You know, which gets us all the microcystin too. And so, but, you know, when you run water through gas chromatography and measure it, you get a series of spikes out of pure water. And they are arsenic, Cipro, the styrenes from your plastic water bottles, and arsenic. Those are your 4 big spikes. Okay. And all of those are things that won't break down. And they just keep being recirculated, and we ingest them, and we pee them out, and we put them back through our water treatment plant. And our water treatment plant can't keep up with them, and they recirculate. And slowly but surely, one day, we're going to have enough Cipro in all the water on Earth, because this molecule doesn't seem to break down. Wow. That all our tendons will let go. Oh, no. Because that's what Cipro and Levaquin do. They get on testosterone receptors and block them so that you don't have your tendons heal, because testosterone is what causes tendons to repair.
Wow. Wow.
Did you mention how the Cipro is entering the environment?
Yeah, we're gobbling it because family docs now have decided no antibiotic works but Cipro. And Cipro is now generic, and it's really cheap, and you got family docs out there that are writing it 10 times a day. Oh, you got a head cold? Here's your Cipro. Oh, you got acne? Here's your Cipro. Oh, you got a boil? Here's your Cipro. And it is rapidly got, because it's developing resistance in bacteria is, slower. The Caflex is ruined now, and the Sulfur is ruined, and all those antibiotics are not working. And a lot of times you'll look down your sensitivity list and you go, Cipro, over and over again. I'd be happier if people were actually doing cultures, waiting for them to come back and looking at sensitivities. Right. But the plain fact is most people who are writing Cipro aren't doing cultures and don't even know if they have a bacteria, nor do they know if it's even sensitive to Cipro, unfortunately. We've said many times on these recordings, don't take an antibiotic till you've done a culture.
Right. Yeah.
And if you can, don't take an antibiotic until the culture's back.
Yeah.
But, that's where the Cipro is coming from.
Okay. Wow.
We're being poisoned. We're not, this isn't about detoxification. This is about turning off the faucet. This is not about draining the tub. It really isn't that easy to detoxify yourself. We've got, Hulda Clerk's Detox, and we've got, Diatomaceous earth, and we've got activated charcoal, and you can guess on whether or not N-acetylcysteine is good for you or bad for you. It depends on whether or not you're sulfur rich or sulfur poor. And you can take calcium D-glucarate and upregulate the removal of Xeno hormones from your liver, which I do. And things like that. But we're sending the wrong message when we're telling people that they want to detox. I mean, I'm not kidding. I got people who are coming in drinking 2 beers, taking Tylenol and Motrin and drinking bottled water and ask me what I recommend for detoxification.
Well, I was going to ask you on the
calcium D-glucarate.
Yeah. Do you recommend it only for men or women as well?
No, it is a primary detoxification pathway in the liver. Okay. You have to remember that.
So it's good for women as well.
Right.
Okay.
The problem that you run into is that you have phases of detoxification, phase 1 and phase 2 predominantly. And if you take a bunch of vitamin C, you upregulate phase 1 and dump everything into phase 2. And if phase 2 isn't working, you can get really sick. And that's the reason why people say, I take B vitamins and I feel awful. Well, they're really toxic. I had a thing that happened to me one time that probably one of the most toxic people in my life in terms of you just meet him and you look at his health and you look at his doctors and you go, this guy's being killed by his doctors. He's really toxic. And I did a lecture on healing oils of the Bible at my church. And we did it in a room with an 8-foot ceiling and a projector's running in front of me, and I'm putting drops of frankincense and myrrh and galbanum, etc., in little glass dishes and passing them around for people to smell, and they're passing them back up, and I'm setting them beside the projector. And we're all not recognizing, because this is happening slowly, that this room, is really, really become a great big infuser. And I didn't know that until I took my first load to the car and walked back in the room and went, oh my gosh, okay. My friend missed 4 days of work. Nobody else complained. And he went home sick for 4 days because all those essential oils were detoxifiers. And he was toxic. And his pathways were shot. And all we did was stir up his toxins but not get rid of any of them. And Bill got really, really sick for 4 days.
Wow.
So that's it. That's a fascinating story.
It's like when we ran the Spartan race and came home and everybody showered off in the hotel shower and clogged up the tub because they had all the mud. So what this leads to, what can people do? You've mentioned make certain choices, stay away from plastic bottled water, other things that you mentioned.
Drink out of steel and glass.
And but we're doing this in a culture, in an environment, in the U.S. at least, that's just steeped in this stuff. So I'm going to plant my little organic garden out back, but meanwhile I've got
you've got neighbors who are spraying their lawns.
And sprays, and my neighbor's using Roundup, literally, and that kind of thing. So, so what are some extra steps that people might need to consider, given that you're in an environment that's just sat to everything in the grocery store?
You could try moving to Haiti. I go down there, and all my team members by about the 3rd day go, "Man, I feel better down here." And I go, "Yeah, they won't allow Monsanto on the island." Okay. And everything's being grown locally. I'm buying my tomatoes from some lady who grew it in her backyard, and it's got scab on it and a bad spot, because that's what you get when you grow your vegetables organically. And everybody gets down there and goes, oh my gosh, I feel so much better. And then we hit Miami, walk into Burger King, because we've been under proteinized for the last 8 days, and immediately everyone is sick.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you got.
It feels
just can't
terrible.
handle that. Yeah.
Yeah. And you just, and so
Right.
I don't know. I mean, we are killing ourselves in America, and we don't care. We don't care about quality. We care about price. It's just very simple. And we want our meat to be $2 a pound.
Right.
But the price, we don't look at the whole price. The
whole
no.
Cost. We don't. Yeah. We look at the cost, not the price.
Yeah, although the closest that drug ads ever got to truthfulness that I saw was back after the big Tylenol tainting scare, when there was then the Motrin ad came on and says, and taking Tylenol can cost so much more. And everybody knew what they meant at the time.
Right.
They didn't mean the purchase rate.
Yeah, I was just going to say.
I used to have a cartoon that showed a pill bottle and it said, FDA warning, FDA approved.
Right.
I love that one.
Yeah, you're going to have to help me with it sounds like there's several things you can do to help your body get rid of some of the toxins, and that is the Diatomaceous, or food grade. It has to be food grade.
Yeah, it has to be food grade.
And the calcium
D-glucarate. Yeah, I do not recommend NAC. I do not recommend N-acetylcysteine.
Okay.
NAC.
Yeah, that
NAC
turns
you
into
don't.
glutathione. The problem is
well,
that people actually will do blood levels and say, I don't have any glutathione. And I go, that's because you're using it all. But you're making it like crazy, and when you pour NAC in, you rev yourself. So you can either be thiol short or thiol heavy, and if you guess wrong, you'll feel terrible.
Oh,
okay,
interesting.
And it's kind of hard to
take
figure
that
that out. And so, but I really tell people, when you get your emphasis on the side of detox, you're on the wrong side of the equation.
You've got to do what.
Quit.
Okay.
Quit filling the tub. Don't worry about draining the tub.
It sounds like dental fillings is a place to really seriously.
Oh yeah,
look at.
sure.
Another
Yeah.
thing to do is try to get those out. Yeah.
And black mold.
I'm not convinced.
Home or work.
The composite, I have heard from a different doctor, the composite fillings are not good for you either.
They have their own issues. Dr. Huggins talked about that in the meeting we had before the lecture. We had a local dentist who talked that night, and Dr. Huggins, you could tell, just hated him. He was exactly the opposite of Huggins, and Huggins did a lot to humiliate him in the meeting, not in a lecture.
Okay.
And there are safe biological products and there are unsafe biological products, and the trade-off is the ones that are hardest and most adherent tend to be the most dangerous.
Oh.
And so a dentist who is trying to get good dental outcome, that guy's probably putting on overlays and whitening your teeth and doing all kinds of chemical things, and isn't talking about the chemicals he's using, is probably going to be using harsh chemicals that are dangerous. And a dentist who is talking to you about choices is probably using the right products.
Okay.
And that might take, and of course you always have the choice of going to a biological dentist, and you'll spend more money.
Okay.
The people who are taking out fillings correctly are also replacing them with things that aren't making you sick. So going to a biological dentist works.
Well, we've been speaking with Dr. J. Nielsen MD, a former FDA researcher and a family practice doc, about reducing poisons, reducing toxicity in your body and in your environment. And the number one lesson I'm taking away from today is turn off the tap before draining the tub.
That's right.
Thank you, Dr. Nielsen, for joining us again.
It was a pleasure.
HealingYourself.Life.
Thank you.
you.